Coming to you from 4,200 feet in the hills of Oregon, it is the voice of Chi-Town, the reddest beard in the high desert, your host of the MOA broadcast, Sam Wilson. All right, folks, we got a great show lined up for us today. All kinds of good stuff. First off, our show highlights. This show is going to be almost, I wouldn't say primarily, but more than half is going to focus of the news stories are going to focus on stuff that happened in Florida. It is just popping down there this last week or two. All kind of stuff. Most of it bad, unfortunately, but we've come to expect no less from Florida. We'll try and keep it as lighthearted as possible, though. We had animals attack in Florida, multiple stories. A great little piece we're going to do. So we did get some feedback via email. People wanted to have more of the outdoor stuff. I thought, I don't know, I'm not really good at this kind of stuff sometimes. I think most people want, when I see what's on TV, which I don't watch much of TV, I see what's on like the streaming service. I don't even actually have regular TV service. I watch streaming stuff on my computer and phone and stuff. That's about it. The level of people's attention span and the quality of programming has gone down so much. I just, thought or assumed foolishly that people wouldn't be interested in real legitimate skills type stuff. Apparently I was wrong, because that's been a number of the emails have been related to that. And so we're going to cover, we've got a great segment on survival and navigation skills in today's episode. It's going to be right around the second half of the first segment, and a good chunk of the second part as well, hopefully. It'll depend how things go. But good stuff. And this is going to be a little bit more in-depth. It's not going to be advanced, so anybody is going to be able to find something of interest and be able to use it. But it is going to be a little bit more focused on like navigation and real survival scenario type situations and skills. So anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. The survival and navigation skills segment. More misleading vaccine. I use the word misleading, and I am being extremely generous with this. Again, we don't get politically involved here at the MOA or Make It Out Alive, a broadcast. But we do, we see what's going on in the world, and we see things. We have brains, we can think. I don't like to force my opinion down anyone's throat. I like to present the facts, which is, like I've always said, that's what the news used to do. And if I'm going to do something that's, opinion-based, then I'll let you know this has some opinion stuffed in there. But primarily we do the facts, and you draw your own conclusion. I like to trust and respect that people are going to use their faculties properly and critically and come to the right conclusion for them and their families. So anyway, and again, we have more urine attacks. You can guess where that's coming from. And before I forget, we have had some really good response to the true crime series. So I'll get to this briefly. We got a whole bunch of stuff ahead of us. I got to keep moving. Going back about 2-3 weeks now, we started doing a true crime segment. So the MOA broadcast, the Make It Out Live broadcast, is done once a week. It goes out Saturday morning and Sunday evening on the local radio here in Southern Oregon. And the latest episode gets uploaded to like Spotify, gearconvoy.com, Apple Podcast, and the Patreon page on Sunday and Monday usually. And then we have that's the hour-long episode that you're listening to right now. Then we do the MOA True Crime series, which is about a 30-35 minute show that goes out once a week on between Wednesday and Friday. It just depends when I get it out. It's more work than you might think to produce these to the level of quality that I do. And this is not pro quality maybe, but it's still not just like, talking into a solo cup on a string, recording my voice. So we try very hard to present a high quality product to people. That being said, we've had good feedback from the True Crime series. The first one was about Tommy Two Guns DeSimone. He was the character played by Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. And then there was also Anthony Spilatro, which was the character also, ironically or coincidentally, you might say, played by Joe Pesci in Casino. The Spilatro brothers, there was a long and rich history of outlaw activity in Chicago and the Chicago outfit by them. Very interesting first two episodes. The third episode was the Gemini twins and the DeMeo crime crew out of New York. Really good stuff. And again, none of this is necessarily groundbreaking. A lot of people have covered these over the years, but it's always nice to get, I try and you can't get it 100% accurate because who even knows what all went down, behind closed doors 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago in some cases. And the people that were there are criminals. They're sure not going to be telling the truth if they're even alive 40, 50 years later. But we do get some of the broad strokes. I try and go with some of the more well-established themes and narratives and so forth and present a great thing. People have liked it so far. So anyway, if you haven't checked that out, check it out. If you don't use Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can get it by going directly to www.gearconvoy.com and hit the MOA broadcast tab at the top of the page, depending whether you're on a phone or a tablet or a computer or whatever. And you can listen to them all for free. The video versions we have of the MOA broadcast alone on patreon.com, Gear Convoy, Sam Wilson. Again, you can find all that information on the MOA broadcast tab, but you can listen to all of it for free. So it's great stuff. I think you'll like it. We've had a lot of good feedback. And if you have any questions, you have any feedback or suggestions for a future topic of a show, hit us up with an email at info@gearconvoy.com, and we'll be happy to try and include that in a future episode. We had a couple of emails, feedback from last episode. Last episode, I had a little brief segment on strong, independent women's in the United States. As predicted, that elicited a few responses. But I'm not going to, there's no way we're going to get to listener emails today. We got too much in the show. But actually, the 2 or 3 women that replied were in favor of what we were talking about. None of it was derogatory or misogynistic, as is one of the hot buzzwords of the day. Misogyny, sexism. Those are the words that everybody likes to throw around when they don't like something that they're hearing. We were just looking, if you haven't listened to last episode, number 16 or 17, whatever it is, we talked about whether you would rather be in line behind a woman who doesn't know what she's doing while selecting a steak at the meat market, or a man who doesn't know what he's doing while selecting a steak at the supermarket. So they were on equal footing there. Anyway, the women were in support. They didn't want any of it either. They'd rather be behind the man because he's going to get out of the way. Anyway, we got to keep moving. We go to Florida for our first story. We'll read the headline and then jump right in. Alligator kills Florida woman after tipping over her canoe, investigators say, by the AP. This was May 8th, 2025. This just happened right before recording this episode. St. Petersburg, Florida. An alligator killed a Florida woman after tipping over a canoe she and her husband were paddling, which investigators say appeared to be an accidental encounter. It happened Tuesday afternoon near the mouth of Tiger Creek into Lake Kissimmee, south of Orlando. Orlando, I don't know what it's like now. I used to go to Orlando a number of times in years past. It was always very nice. Enjoyed it there. No outstandingly huge memories, but just had a good time there. And Busch Gardens, of course, which was there at the time, probably still is, I'm guessing. According to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, it's near the same location as a March alligator attack in which a woman was bitten on the elbow while kayaking. We covered that story as well a couple of weeks ago. Investigators said at a news conference the couple was canoeing in about 2.5 feet of water when they came upon a large alligator. The startled animal thrashed suddenly, tipping over the canoe and sending both people into the water. Holy smoke. So if you're not from the States, or if you've never been to Florida, or if you're a city dweller or whatever, just so you know, I think I mentioned this in an earlier episode, I've been out on airboats in Florida on more than one occasion. But the longest airboat ride I took was several years ago, and very long, interesting. It's still like not necessarily the wild, wild west, but it's like a jungle down there, man. In some areas, it's still very uncivilized, and it's wild, man. You gotta be careful. Anyway, we're on an airboat, and I remember, so this airboat was basically like a big John boat with a 350 engine. So if you're not from the States or you're not an engine person, a 350 is like a car or a truck, high performance engine in many cases. Okay. So a 350 engine with a giant fan attached to it is basically all it is. And there's some dude sitting up there with a beard that was down to his waist, and he's just working I think they had like these rudder sticks, because it just controls these fan blade, or these rudder blades that direct the giant fan on the back that's basically tied directly to the engine. It's a direct drive type situation. It's wild, very loud. So we're going along, and I remember thinking, man, look at all of these logs that are down in the water. And they were all, like dark brown logs just floating. And I'm like, this doesn't really look like a logging area. How are they going to get logs out of here? Because Oregon, they log a lot here, and there's logging roads everywhere. How are you going to get a bunch of logs out of the swamp? When we stopped for like a break, I don't remember what it was. This is going back a few years. I remember asking the logboat or the airboat dude. I'm like, what's with all these logs? And he just laughed and looked at me like, those aren't logs, those are gators. So they're everywhere, man. I don't know what the population is like now compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago, whatever. But this is what happened. They were going along in apparently 2.5 feet of water, and they probably didn't even see this gator. When they're doing their thing, a lot of times a large portion of their body is submerged, and their eyes and their nostrils are all that's kind of sticking up, or their body, maybe the torso and tail may be there, but it looks like a log, and they have phenomenal camouflage. If you're not looking for it, it's very easy to miss it, especially if they're just below the water surface. Anyway, we don't know what happened, but apparently they either went over the animal or bumped into it, startled it, thrashed, and it capsized the boat. And this man and woman, I think they were husband and wife, it says the canoe drifted over on top of the alligator. It was startled, according to the FWC director, and they both went into the water. The husband tried to fight off the animal, but was unsuccessful. According to officials, the victim was identified as 61-year-old Cynthia Dykema of Davenport, Florida. It was not clear if her husband was injured. Now, it says a trapper, and this is a part I'm kind of conflicted on. I know everyone's going to say they got to put the animal down, but listen to the context of this and the next story before you jump to that conclusion. And I'm not saying it's the wrong conclusion, but I just hate to see animals killed for doing what animals are going to do no matter what. Anyway, let's move on here. A trapper captured an alligator measuring more than 11 feet that is suspected of being the animal involved. Here's the thing. But investigators caught another large alligator that also could have been responsible, officials said. Now, they didn't say whether either or both alligators were put down. I'm assuming both were put down or dispatched. And that's the part that I hate. I don't know. Let's just jump right out there. I don't know what I would feel like if it was the gator or whatever other animal that had just killed and potentially consumed my friend, family member, mate, whatever. I don't know. Okay. I've never had that happen. I can probably think of a few people in my extended family that I wouldn't mind seeing attacked and consumed by a gator, but that's sarcasm. Let's move on. I just hate to see. So 2 alligators were trapped, and I'm guessing dispatched. Which one was the right one? Or what if it was another one? What if it was neither gator and they put down 2 larger gators for no reason? Anyway, I just hate to see it. That being said, I'll reserve that for the family to make their decision. That's none of my business. Interesting statistics here. Since 1948, when officials began tracking alligator bites involving people in Florida, there have been 487 unprovoked bites through 2024. 339 were major bites, and since 1948, only 27 were fatal. That's not really that bad considering the fact that the gators they're extremely strong predators, and humans are relatively defenseless against a large enough gator. So 27, and since 48, what is that like? Yeah, that's not very many at all. Once every 3 years or less. Probably even less than that. I'm doing my math on the fly here, and I got too many things going on, but that's not that many. Okay, the most recent fatal alligator attack was in February 2023 when 85-year-old George Serge was killed. Gloria Serge was killed while walking her dog along if you recall that, it was horrible. This poor lady is walking her dog near this pond or whatever it was in Fort Pierce. And this gator, I guess he saw the dog and he comes blasting up out of the water. And I think the lady tried to defend her dog or something. It was gruesome. The poor lady, I felt so horrible. I'm sure her family, it was just bad. The gator got her, and it was not pleasant at all. If there is a pleasant way to be consumed by an alligator, but what a horrible way to go for the poor little old lady. My respect to the family. Okay. Earlier that year in 2023, a 23-year-old man lost his arm in an attack near a pond behind a bar in Port Charlotte. I'm telling you what. Florida it's a jungle down there, baby. All right, we go to another story in Florida. Headline: Wildlife officials confirm man, 89, victim of first fatal Florida black bear attack. Jerome is in Collier County after authorities, let's see here, Jerome in Collier County. So Jerome is the town or whatever, township, whatever this is, the settlement. Authorities were called shortly after 7 a.m. Monday they confirmed that an 89-year-old man was the victim of the first fatal Florida black bear attack in the state's history after his partial remains were found in a bear. According to the FWC, that's the Florida Wildlife Commission, they confirmed it was the first fatal black bear attack in the state's history. Now, again, this is the part that I was alluding to, and I'm not an expert at all on any level, and I wasn't involved in these scenarios in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut and stay in my lane. But I just hate to hear it. They killed or trapped, probably put down, I'm guessing, I don't know, 2 gators for the last scenario. After the attack, 3 black bears were killed in the area, and one of them, a 263-pound male, contained the partial remains of Markle. Did they give the guy's name yet? I'm going to get back to the bear story. Guys, I'm telling you what, the quality of reporting and journalism, if you want to call it that, has gone down. It has declined so badly with a lot of these American newspapers, in my opinion. Some of these articles, I research literally easily dozens of articles a week and hundreds upon hundreds every month preparing for this show and the true crime series and all this. It took me to my 3rd article to get on this bear story to get all of this info. And even then it was still pieced together. It is unreal. I remember growing up, my dad, we grew up in Missouri. Okay. And so we were not too far from St. Louis. The big newspaper then was the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I don't know what it's like now. I haven't read it in a long time, but it used to be a pretty good paper, I guess. I don't know. It sufficed our needs. But you could read an article. There was no internet and so forth. You read these articles and you had a good idea of what was going on. There was the who, what, where, when, why, and so forth. A lot of these articles now that are written online, I can tell a lot of them, or at least some of them, are written by AI, and the rest of them are written by people who have no idea what journalism is and how to convey the who, what, where, when, why, and the flavor of the story while just giving you the facts and keeping their opinion out of it. Anyway, it stinks to me. I hate it. They put down 3 black bears, apparently. They killed 3 black bears. I guess they know what they're doing. I don't. I'll shut up and I'll stay in my lane. That being said, they did find the remains, and one of those bears, the remains of, where does it say his first name? I want to get this guy's name in here if it's in here. I don't know that it does it tell us? I don't know. They call him Markle. He had a first name, and I apologize for not getting it in here. In a statement Friday, let's see, the remains of Markle were found about 100 yards from his home. But this is the interesting part. The investigators found signs a bear had actually entered the home. DNA results received on Friday positively identify the 263-pound male. The bear's DNA was present on Markle. So they did get, out of the 3, at least one of them was the one apparently that killed the man inside his residence and on the dog's body. So it killed the man, the 89-year-old man, and his dog. And apparently went inside their house, was probably looking for food or whatever else. If you ever look at the social media, there's lots of videos of bears. They'll just kick open somebody's home door. I saw one, this bear literally just walks up and kicks open this door to a front door to a home. And he goes right to the refrigerator, knows how to open the door, and he just starts eating food out of this refrigerator. They had security cameras inside the home. And this bear kicks open the door, goes right to the fridge, opens the door, and just starts eating. He filled himself up, and then he waddled on out and went into their hot tub and sat in the water. But anyway, this is unfortunately a sad story. All 3 bears were tested for rabies. The results were negative. The Collier County Medical Examiner is still in the process of completing the investigation, but indicated the preliminary cause of death was consistent with injuries caused by a black bear. The sequence of events remain unclear. Jerome, I guess that's the settlement or town or city, it doesn't say very clearly, is in the South Bear Management Unit, which has the 3rd largest population of bears in Florida, estimated at 1,044 in 2015. So anyway, if you're wondering what the MOA theme is as it pertains to these last 2 stories, situational awareness, sometimes I related a story last week where I encountered a bear on trail. When it comes to wild animals, they play for keeps. And you may or may not see or hear them before it's too late. So there's not always something you can do. And again, both of these folks were unfortunate. They lost their lives. We're not going to sit here and pick it apart or make a big joke of it. But man, you got to keep, as the old saying goes, keep your head on a swivel when you're dealing with nature. There's an old saying, I forget who it was. I read it in some survival book somewhere. If you're going to get frisky with Mother Nature, you better bring protection. I just messed that all up. You better bring protection, it goes. Word whiskers there. Okay, we go on. Now, if you recall, we had a story a couple of weeks ago for that tourist helicopter that went down in New York. There was an update to this story. The NTSB reveals disturbing new details in doomed tourist helicopter that crashed into the Hudson River, killing 6. I read the article. I just wanted to include it because there was a lot of interest in the story nationally. They don't really give us any new details other than that they heard loud noises coming from this New York helicopter tours at the company named Chopper as it was flying over the Hudson. If you'll recall, this was a helicopter tour that was being flown by I believe it was a Navy veteran. I think he may have been a Navy SEAL. Some articles were conflicting on that, but the guy clearly, was not just some clown. He knew what he was doing. I think he only had 700 and something hours of flight time, which is not necessarily extensive depending on what you're doing. But still, I don't think you can blame what happened on him, because if you watch the video, several different media outlets carried it. That chopper, it broke up into 3 pieces. They said people that were filming it on the river heard distinct, loud bangs, noises, and surveillance cameras captured the moment the helicopter split into 3 major sections: the fuselage, the main rotor, and the tail boom. Guys, if you're flying an aircraft and it breaks up into 3 pieces midair, there's nothing you can do. I mean, if you somehow survive, thank God, thank luck, thank whatever you believe in. But you can't blame that on the pilot from anything I can see. They did, checks. Everything was in line as far as safety checks, inspections, and all that. And he hadn't done anything that he wasn't supposed to do. The New York helicopter CEO, Michael Roth, has said he has, quote, no clue why, end quote, his chopper malfunctioned and crashed mid-flight. The company has since shuttered. Okay, let's get into this. Moving on here. Let me get a sip, excuse me. All right. Now, this next segment is going to be on urban and wilderness survival. Some of this I pulled from a study guide that I found online from years back. There was no name for the article, so I don't even know who to credit. I could dig it up if someone is curious. And then some of it has been from my experience. I wrote out a little outline and kind of combined the two in a spreadsheet. We're going to kind of go through this, and then the real meat, in my opinion, for me personally, is in the navigation segment that we're going to do at the end. And then we'll have to split this up before and after the break. We've got a few minutes, so we're going to dive right in. This is urban versus wilderness survival. So very, very similar skills and definitely very similar mindsets. However, very different environments that you're operating in, different tools and different things are going to come into play. Different resources are going to be at your disposal and will be important or less important, more or less important, depending on where you're at. So let's jump in. There was a little preamble we wrote here. Let's see, understand the differences between urban and wilderness survival is critical. You definitely would have, I'm not a huge fan of the term go bag. Go bag kind of got popular. I guess go bag I'm okay with. It's the bug out bag that I'm not a huge fan of. And very briefly, for those of you maybe that English isn't your first language or not familiar with this, a bug out bag it's basically rooted, it started off rooted in somewhat in reality, and then it evolved into this fantasy land thing, Rambo desire world that doesn't really exist, where you just grab this backpack out of your gun safe or your truck or your go room or whatever, your safe room, whatever you got, and you jump outside and you start running, and you have everything you need in this backpack to be able to survive anything that life throws at you in the next 72 hours or a week, or it's some kind of movie survival fantasy. In reality, and a lot of the guys that wrote articles on this and espoused this and did videos, the idea of quote unquote bugging out was jumping into your off-road vehicle or your dirt bike or whatever and going off into the woods to escape the absolute pandemonium that's going to be taking place probably in a lot of cities, which I would believe is very accurate. And we've seen in events in the last several years, cities go bonkers. I don't know if you've ever been involved in or present at a riot or a disturbance before. I have been involved and present, I should say, at both. It is pandemonium. You can't even hear. There are Molotov cocktails flying. It is absolute bedlam. But the idea behind bugging out was you would jump onto your into your car or onto your motorcycle or your off-road bicycle or moped or what scooter or whatever, and go off into the woods in this little shack that you had set up in the survival shelter and this and that. Guys, that's not really reality. If a lot of people start doing that, pretty soon your resources, which are fairly scarce anyway in most wilderness areas, relative to the population that will be going there, resources are going to be gone. You're not going to be hunting deer because they're going to be gone if hundreds or thousands of people start descending upon this area in the wilderness. Anyway, we're going to get off track. Excuse me, off track here, so I got to stay moving forward. But that's the idea. There were bug out bags, go bags, and so forth. There are a couple of factors here. Three that jump to mind here: population concentration, technological reliance, and social volatility make both environments uniquely challenging. And you can use your brain to see how those are both going to apply to an urban and a wilderness scenario. Okay, so we got a few key differences. I'm going to kind of read through these and you think about it on your own. I'm not going to have time to break down that would be hours. We could do this literally for hours. Maybe we'll expand on another show if we get enough feedback, but for now we're going to go through it. So a couple of the key differences between urban and wilderness survival. So what kind of threats? In an urban survival situation, there may be civil unrest, which is extremely common. That was one of the first things that happens. People start going crazy and they lose it in the streets. That was actually, I'm not a huge fan of zombie movies and stuff, but if you watch the movie World War Z, I thought that was a very good, in my opinion, that was a very good film that accurately or reasonably accurately depicted how quickly things would devolve into pure bedlam. And I thought it was a great film. That to me seemed fairly realistic for given the context of a zombie movie. That's about how it's going to go. Resources are going to get scarce very quickly, and cities are going to be overrun badly, which is compounded by the fact that many city people have very few of those type of survival skills. But let's keep moving. Civil unrest, grid failure, scarcity of resources. How many people do you know, or maybe you're one of them, if so, there's still time for you, there's hope, that are going to absolutely flip out and have zero options and recourse if the power grid goes down? I've lived in multiple cities. I knew zero people. I'm sure they exist. Don't get me wrong. I knew zero people, and I ran with a lot of people of like mind that had any kind of resources once the power grid goes down. A few may have had like some solar panels, but otherwise zero. Again, I'm sure they exist. I didn't know any. So how many do you know that if the power grid, when they went to bed tonight, they wake up in the morning, there's no power, no juice in the city when they wake up, they have options. Whether it's generator, solar, large batteries, whatever else. How many do you know? Good question. Now we apply that threats to wilderness. Exposure, big one. You have to have shelter of some kind because without an insulated structure like a home or a trailer or whatever else, things can get that's one of the number one killers in the wilderness is exposure. Wildlife. Man, alligators, bears just attacked people that were in civilized areas and killed them both in the last week in Florida. Okay, and then isolation. I mean, what if you need medical? What if you need certain things that you can't produce on your own? That's a very serious threat or a risk in wilderness survival. Okay, we got to take a break. When we get back, we're going to continue with the grid here, or this chart, and go through the survival and stuff. And then we get into one of my favorites, the navigation segment. We'll see you in a bit, folks. More Make It Out Alive with Sam Wilson after this.
In the year 3047 on Space Station Delta 9, one man dared to launch a burger joint in the void of space.
I opened Galactic Grill, flame-broiled bliss in zero gravity. But nobody knows we're here. Not even the guy from Maintenance Deck C, and he lives next door.
Enter Commander Jenny of the Gold Country Radio Marketing Federation.
Captain, you need to partner with Gold Country Radio.
Radio? I thought that was ancient Earth tech, like flip phones and salad.
Wrong again, Space Cowboy. Radio still works, even now. When you team up with Gold Country Radio, you don't just get heard on air. You get promoted online, too. They'll plug your business on social media and even put your logo on goldcountryradio.org. Yeah, that website they're always hyping on air.
Promotional power activated.
So I did it. Partnered with Gold Country Radio. And now, the lunch line goes out the airlock. We've got orders from 5 decks up. Even the commander's ordering double bacon asteroids.
I told you, Gold Country Radio. Timeless, effective, and totally space safe.
Want your business to take off? Visit goldcountryradio.org and click Contact to get started. Gold Country Radio. Low cost, high yield, and still light years ahead.
You're listening to the MOA broadcast with Sam Wilson. Will you make it out alive? All right, folks, we are back from the break here on the MOA broadcast with your host, Sam Wilson. All right, we're going to pick up basically when we left off. We were talking about we're going through basically almost like an outline, a study guide, whatever you would call it, of some differences between urban and wilderness survival in today's day and age. We just covered the different threats in the urban survival area. To recap very briefly, there was civil unrest, grid failure, scarcity of resources. In the wilderness survival area, you have to deal with exposure, wildlife, and isolation. We move on. Our next category would be resources. Now, here is the interesting thing. When you are dealing with urban survival in a city, small town, suburb, however you want to describe that, you're going to have much greater resources than you are in a way than you are in the wilderness, depending on your ability to take advantage of and use them. Unless you don't have a reasonable degree of training, the average person is going to have a more difficult time taking advantage of the resources in the wilderness. They are vast and you can do many, many, many things, but the average person is not going to have the training to easily take advantage of and utilize those resources. A lot of the resources you're going to have in cities are going to be food caches, structures, shelter, water, potentially some type of functioning grid, power grid, and so forth. Plus scavenging, you can find a lot of things, whether it's vehicles for mobility or other resources. Anyway, and those are what we have here. When it comes to urban survival, the resources, you have buildings, scavenged goods, utilities. Even if the power grid is down, there may be some places that are still being run by generator or ways to get fuel if you are equipped with a generator or other solar, other sources and forms of energy. In the wilderness, you're going to be a little more creative and probably have a little bit more training to be able to recognize those resources, but they're out there. You have natural resources such as water, wood, shelter, and an abundance of food, hopefully. And this is what I was talking about earlier when it came to the whole quote-unquote bug-out thing. Guys, if everybody, quote-unquote, and I use that in a sarcastic fashion or manner, bugs out, just grabs their backpack or whatever their gear is in their Jeep and their off-road vehicle, SUV, and they Cybertruck, whatever. I'm not knocking the Cybertruck. Let's not get into that. And they just go into the woods. You're going to be facing a massive amount of competition for very limited resources very quickly. And in the end, and we'll get to this in a moment, but the bottom line is what's going to become more valuable than almost any of these things is the knowledge and the training, and particularly the experience to take advantage of any resources present and available very quickly. Because if you're in an urban area, and that's what I was mentioning in that movie World War Z earlier, very quickly these resources got gobbled up because in cities you have large amounts of people stacked on top of each other and they're all going to be competing for those resources very quickly. In more, urban, or I should say rural areas or wilderness areas, it's going to take a little more time for people to get there and the population to start concentrating and growing in that area. You're going to have a little more time to kind of figure out what you're going to do. Obviously, one of the best scenarios is you're out of a large city, hopefully, and you're able to shelter in place. Far preferable to just grabbing a backpack full of gear and going off into the woods. That's not really a viable scenario in most cases. It's going to be rare that actually works out for somebody. So anyway, let's get back to our outline here so we don't lose track of time. Mobility. Limited by debris or congestion in a city. Very true. You're going to have, once vehicles start running out, once they run out of gas or fuel or whatever it is they run on, whether it's, electric cars, EVs, diesel, gasoline, propane, whatever. If there's no fuel at gas stations or there's massive lines, the price goes through the roof and you can't afford it, that vehicle means nothing now. Once it's dead in the water and it's stuck on the street, it means nothing. So roadways, and we've seen this in modern day events, vehicles just get abandoned. I've seen this myself in snow events and ice events. People will abandon vehicles. They're no longer of any use. In the wilderness, you're going to be primarily on foot. Even no matter what kind of vehicle you've got, it doesn't have a fuel supply ad infinitum. You're going to run out of fuel, and eventually it boils down to you're going to be hoofing it. Now, maybe if you've got horses, that's going to be different, or other types of pack animals. But in general, even then, there's going to be limitations. Now you've got to take care of and deal with and feed and take care of those animals. In most cases, chances are you're going to wind up on foot. So navigation, and this is a big one that is very easy to practice and learn now, which also has large ramifications. Brief story. I used to live in New York City, and I'm the kind of person, I always had one or two little button compasses on me. And New York City, now if you go in Brooklyn, Queens, North, it's just kind of a mess. And you get super lower Manhattan, it's kind of a mess. But the large portion, the majority of Manhattan is a very nice, clean, in most places, grid. It's left and right, up and down. So if you have a small button compass or any type of compass, whether it's on your phone, whatever, you can easily navigate. And I would hang out with friends, and we'd be, especially those that weren't familiar with the city. I was very fairly new there in the beginning, and I was able to navigate very quickly to different locations because the city was laid out like a grid in Manhattan, and I had a button compass. So navigation is very important. There are a few basic navigational skills you can learn very easily, and especially, I don't care if this sounds sexist or not, especially if you're a man, it is incumbent upon you to take care of your family, your group, whatever. These are very easy to learn, and you should do this. I don't sell these products. This is nothing from me. This is very simple research. We'll get into it in a moment, though. Navigation in the city grid maps, GPS, landmarks. In the wilderness, you have compass, topographical maps, and natural indicators. Most people, I have been hiking and backpacking with dozens upon dozens of people. I have encountered maybe two or three that actually knew how to use a map and compass effectively. And both of those two or three, or whatever it was, 3-4 people, 2-3 people, were extremely slow and out of practice. I would not want to depend on them in an emergency situation. No offense. I'm not a master. I'm not perfect either. The point is, this is a work in progress. You continually try and learn. And let's go ahead and close out the outline. Then we'll jump into the other sections. Security risks in city. The security risks are going to be, it's just going to be a never-ending story. You're going to have other people, looters, unstable structures. There may be leaking gas mains. I don't know if you've ever been around a gas main that is ignited. I have. It is insane. You don't want to be anywhere near that. Water mains that go, it's a mess. It can render very quickly, a huge water leak can render a structure completely uninhabitable and very unsafe in a matter of minutes or seconds, depending how close you are to the pipe. So, or the main, whatever, whether it's a service line, a main, etc. So, the city, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, even though there can be a lot more resources, can be very, very treacherous. So you're going to make sure you're prepared. In the wilderness, you have predators, weather, and terrain can be equally deadly. But again, maybe it's just my preference for the woods and the country, but it's easier to manage those expectations. You know basically what it's going to be. And in my opinion, the fewer humans you have to interact with, I would much rather deal with animals than humans. Humans are far more treacherous than animals, in my opinion. At least, especially wild animals, you know what they're going to do. Survival and their self-preservation is of paramount concern to them. You can almost bank on it, on how they're going to react in many situations. Makes them far easier to deal with because you know what they want than humans, who can be very, very deceitful and treacherous. So anyway, that's that. Communications. This is, again, where city is probably going to have the advantage, or definitely is going to have the advantage as far as radios, cell signals, if there's any available. In the woods, I mean, if you got a satellite phone, I don't have a satellite phone. I'm not interested in getting one at this particular point in time. There are like the Garmin InReach type devices and the other PLBs, personal locator beacons, and other things. Honestly, don't even know if that service is going to be up and available in a mass, survival quote type scenario. Who knows? So, both of them are going to be, it's going to be a mixed bag. It's going to boil down to what you're more comfortable with, in a way, I suppose. And, the concentration of resources are going to be different in different ways. You're definitely going to be in much, much higher competition, especially in the beginning, in a city area, an urban area. So, The best you can do is think about this stuff and prepare for it ahead of time. The last thing you want to be doing, this is our outro quote on the MOA broadcast almost every time. If you wait for an emergency to prepare for it, you're probably going to be too late. None of this stuff is really rocket surgery in the beginning. It's just a matter of thinking it out, being prepared, and ultimately, if everything goes down, we're all going to be on the same playing field within a couple of weeks. Food and other resources are going to run out for the vast majority of people very quickly. So it's more about preparing and thinking, okay, what can I do to buy myself a little more time to extend that burn time, so to speak. Okay. Man, we're not have time to get into that. Wilderness threats, we can't do that. Let's go ahead and jump into the navigation. This is one I really like. It's fun. It's interesting. Excuse me. And this is actually very practical. And this is one that's easy to learn. You can practice this in your backyard or on your property if you have enough property. You can go to a city park and practice this. You can practice this on the sidewalk in any type of city, whether you have a nice grid like Manhattan or whether you got a giant bowl of spaghetti like lower Manhattan and maybe like Brooklyn, Queens area. Wherever you are, you can practice. So let's get into navigation without GPS. And this is important because we have again become a society that is extremely dependent on technology. And this was kind of the theme. It struck me right away, even when as a younger individual, when I watched the original Top Gun film. Yes, I know it's a movie, but the premise, the stated premise in the film, I didn't really research it to see how accurate it was, but or if it even existed. But the premise was that the naval fighter pilots, the naval aviators, as they were referred to, when trying to pick up women, they had become dependent on their self-guided missiles and so forth and rockets whenever they were, in air-to-air combat with other planes. And they lost their dogfighting skills and their ability to get in there and do it, the old blood and guts routine, the manual way. And so that was what the whole Top Gun thing was supposed to be about in the first film, was teaching their fighters the ability to dogfight and to do it without all this automated stuff. This is the problem we now face with GPS. I have been hiking and backpacking with a number of people that they are completely helpless when it comes to navigation without the GPS on their device or their phone. And on more than one trip, at least 2 trips I can think of off the top of my head, they forgot to set a waypoint for the vehicle location at the beginning of the trip. So in essence, if you don't do that, depending on how advanced and how much information your GPS has, it's of very little to no value the rest of the trip if you don't have your starting point so you know how to get back. Now, if you've got like Google Maps or Apple Maps or one of the others, and you have the access to satellite or cell, so you can download fresh information, then you may be able to find your way back to a highway or a city or to the starting point. But if the way this was 5, 10, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, if you didn't have all that info downloaded before you left and lost cell service, there was no access to that data while you were on the trail. So let's jump in here. Mastering traditional navigation. Now this is stars, maps, compass. We're not going to get into stars. That's a far more involved skill. And frankly, I've learned it a time or two. I would not trust myself for 5 seconds to navigate by the stars. I could do some refresher courses and probably get back to it, but there is no way I would want to. That's not hardwired into my brain. However, maps and compass, there's a skill. Do we get into it? Okay, this is not that difficult, guys. There was a book I read years ago. It was called the Paul Method. Now, there's 2 different definitions, at least, of the Paul Method. One is where you use your watch, which is very simple, to determine north and south if you have an analog watch, with hands, not a digital watch. If you actually have the hands that move around, you can find north and south in the northern or southern hemisphere very easily with what's called the Paul Method. I forget what the Paul stands for, P-A-U-L. In a book I read, I think it was through like the Paladin Press. If you're older and you're a dude that we used to go to gun shows and all that kind of stuff, you probably remember Paladin Press. They put out all kinds of books. I can't remember if Paladin did this one or not, but there was a series of books by this guy. His last name was Paul, I think. I don't recall his first name. I think he was a Green Beret or something like that. He had one that I know was called Great Living in Grubby Times. I have that one somewhere. And there was another book called The Paul Method. And that stood for Positive Azimuth Uniform Layout. I think that was just a way to incorporate the name in there into the acronym. But it was a good book. Basically, it was like a much more modernized and detailed version of Dead Reckoning, We're not going to have time to explain this, and it's very difficult to do without visuals. But look up dead reckoning. This has been around for thousands of years, literally, especially with maritime folks. This has been used to navigate. It's an extremely simple way, especially over shorter distances, that you can keep a good eye on where you're at and where you're going. I mean, we got to keep moving. We are running out of time. Oh my goodness. If only there was more time. What's the old saying? There is only the illusion of time. Okay, dead reckoning. Long story short, you would record your path that you go on, your direction and so forth, with how much time and everything. So let's say you walk in a straight line north for 1 mile, okay? And then you go due east for 1 mile, okay? Then you would know basically it was 1.5 miles south, I don't know, southwest. I'm doing this in my head while I got a camera in my face, but I think it'd be 1.5 miles southwest to get right back to your starting point. And that probably, that's going to give you a good visual of how dead reckoning works. It's very simple. It's very effective. And that was what that Paul method was based on. You should probably, I should have looked it up in preparation for this episode. That book is probably still out there, the Paul method. The guy's last name was Paul. He had the Green Berets Guide. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a good series of books. You used to find them at gun shows. That's where I got mine like 25 years ago. But basically, that's what you would do. You need very, very, very rudimentary map skills and compass skills and no GPS, no powered devices. You could do it with a button compass if you had to. So look up Dead Reckoning and the Paul method. If we get any interest, we'll go into it and go into a deeper dive in future episodes. There's just not enough time. I want to talk about a great show I saw. One of my more favorite episode or shows in recent times. What was it called? Longmire. It used to be on A&E. It was a nice Western show. I love Westerns. I had some info on that. We're not going to get to it today. Maybe in a future show. But we got to keep moving. Okay, now we were going to discuss this last week, but we didn't have time. We had to cut it, and we're going to have to keep it kind of short this week. Moderna is facing discipline over actions around the COVID vaccine. This story takes us to the UK. It's an article from Outkick. The author was Ian Miller. I kind of like their stuff. Let's just say I like some of their stuff. They really kind of drive home some of the points. Some people are going to take issue with how they lean politically, maybe, but these are just the facts. Most of this article is drawn from a newspaper, The Telegraph in the UK. I would have got it directly from them, but I didn't want to pay the $4.99 a year or whatever it is to download for their paywall their articles. So let's jump right in. Pharmaceutical giant Moderna is facing serious consequences in the UK for several violations of regulatory code around its COVID-19 vaccine. Let me just say briefly, folks, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do. That's not my place, especially medical or legal advice. You draw your own conclusions on what's right for you and your family. I am just reporting on what's in the news. We may or may not view things the same way, but I like to share information that I found fascinating. Let's move on. Moderna, along with Pfizer, became the media's most beloved company in 2021, as both companies with their partners and media allies hyped up the COVID vaccines and what they would eventually or could actually accomplish. Within weeks, COVID vaccines went from a useful tool for the elderly and immunocompromised to becoming an almost universal demand. Politicians, media outlets, and the public health bureaucracy class advocated and imposed vaccine mandates and passport systems. That's all fact. That happened. And even in places like California, they're worse than Florida, only in a different way, in my opinion. And I love California. But politicians like California Governor Gavin Newsom began discussing plans to force children to get COVID vaccines, vaccine passports, etc., and so on. So this is what happened. Some of the allegations against Moderna include employees offering children, £1,500, that's almost $2,000 US, and gifts, including teddy bears, to participate. This is children, minor children apparently. They offered almost $2,000 US and teddy bears to participate in their COVID vaccine trials. A ruling, per the Telegraph, is expected to be released in just a few days over whether or not this was all basically kosher or not with their regulatory bodies. Perhaps even worse, Moderna then misrepresented when it found out about the cash offer and other incentives directed towards children. The pharmaceutical company said it immediately acted once it found out about the cash offers in early 2024. But the outside group, Us for Them, told Moderna about the inappropriate behavior in summer 2023. According to this, Moderna did nothing. Regulations in Britain do not allow for incentives or monetary compensation offers to children or their parents. The PMCPA, it's some long, what is it? PMCPA, does it tell us? I don't know. Yeah, here, the Prescription Medicines Code of Practice Authority. They're the ones that's going after Moderna, apparently. There's the choo-choo train. The PMCPA then ruled that Moderna had demonstrated a completely unacceptable lack of transparency, which damaged the reputation of the industry. An unnamed senior executive at the company, now listen to this, a senior executive co-authored 3 articles promoting their COVID vaccine without disclosing the conflict of interest, meaning, if I read this right, he didn't disclose when he wrote these articles for probably medical publications that he worked for these companies that were promoting these vaccines. One of the articles was written in collaboration with Nadhim Zahawi, the former vaccine minister in Britain. Twitter posts also promoted its COVID shot without acknowledging employment at Moderna. So to put that in context, you would see a Twitter post or a magazine article promoting this and the COVID vaccine by Moderna and not realize the people that wrote it were employed by Moderna. Ask yourself a brief question. And again, I'm not telling anyone what to do. Just ask yourself a question. Why would they do that? Why would they offer kids teddy bears and $2,000 cash to participate in these trials if they were so safe and effective? Just a question. Ask yourself. Per the PMCPA investigation, that is akin to advertising the vaccine, and the lack of disclosure was yet another unacceptable breach. Moderna could face suspension or expulsion from this organization, a good first step after a pattern of misbehavior, according to the article. Okay, now, in contrast, we talked about this again an episode or 2 ago about there are all these studies that one says the vaccines did all this good. Another article says or study says we can't really tell. And the prevailing sentiment that we see over and over again, there's not a clear, like a huge difference that I've been able to find that says, man, the vaccines really protected people, or man, the vaccines didn't really do anything. So it's pretty neck and neck. What does it say? We talked about the efficacy of things like aspirin and antibiotics and insulin. When you use those products, you know immediately they have an impact. And I just wanted to take us briefly down the history of penicillin. 2 or 3, 4 minutes here maybe, and then we got to close up. We're getting close to the end of this hour as well. This is how you know when something is truly effective, though, based on the actual events involved. In case you're unfamiliar with the advent of penicillin, we go back to the early 20th or mid 20th century. Reserve Constable Albert Alexander was the first patient to be treated with injections of penicillin. He was a constable in the police force of the County of Oxford, England. A bombing raid, and this is, again, I don't have time to do it all. Some say a bombing raid. Some say somebody cut his face on some rose bushes. Who in the world even knows? We're talking almost like 80 years ago now. What happened, what does matter, though, is he got an infection, okay? It was the source of his bacterial infection. He became badly infected with both Staphylococcus and Streptococcus and was hospitalized in the Radcliffe Infirmary. Despite efforts of various treatments, Alexander's head was covered with abscesses and one of his eyes had to be removed due to bacterial infection. What happens? The ability of penicillin to slow or counteract bacterial infection had first been noticed by Sir Alexander Fleming in 1928. Having tried the extracted penicillin only on mice, the people at this hospital in England were fearful of the side effects large doses of penicillin might have on humans. So they needed a patient who was terminal. Constable Alexander suited this requirement. On February 12, 1941, Constable Alexander was given an intravenous infusion of 160 milligrams or 200 units of penicillin. Within 24 hours, His temperature had dropped. Now remember, his face was covered in abscesses. He was infected so bad he had to have one of his eyeballs removed surgically. His appetite had returned and the infection had begun to heal. However, due to the instability of penicillin and the wartime restrictions placed in the laboratory, only a small quantity had been extracted of the penicillin, and even though they tried and extracted any remaining penicillin out of Constable Alexander's urine, by the 5th day they had run out. Without the supply of penicillin to continue treatment, he relapsed and died on March 15, 1941. What's the point? Immediately, when they began administering an effective drug, there were differences. There were no question. Penicillin was effective. Now, that's all I'm going to say, folks. Do your research and you make the decision that is best for you and your family based on your decisions. Don't follow my advice, the newspapers, or anybody else's. Do your own research and draw your own conclusions. I just like to see the other side of the story. That's all. Now, we go to Florida to close out the day. Here's the headline and we'll jump right in. Woman urinates on victim's leg after stabbing and robbing him in Pompano Beach. Broward Sheriff's Office deputies said Jamie Danielle McGuirl, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, 48, urinated on the victim during the crime. According to the sheriff's office, the victim told deputies he was at his tent. Now, he was apparently a homeless man himself, he was at his tent, which is right next to McGuirl's. The report states the side of his tent collapsed and he felt a few strikes to his head. As he exited the tent, McGuirl, this is a female, Jamie Danielle McGuirl, attacked him with a multi-bladed purple tool and a 12-inch piece of pipe. God. This poor guy's just in his homeless tent, and he starts getting his head smacked in by a multi-tool and a 12-inch pipe. She attempted to slash him with the blades in an overhead motion, which caused a few marks on his upper left back and a slight laceration to his right hand. The victim then grabbed the tool and took the pipe from her possession. After he grabbed the weapons, he said the offender, McGuirl, grabbed his leg near his waistline and urinated on his leg. She then fled the scene with her boyfriend. Now, I've been in fights where I've seen men urinate on men, and I've had people attempt to urinate on me. I don't know how that, and they were already without pants and clothes. I don't know how this would work with this female if she was clothed, how she's going to urinate on the man on his leg near his waistline, but apparently she did. Allegedly, she took his cell phone. He walked over to the Wawa, which is a convenience store for those of you outside the U.S., and asked the manager to call 911, and then he gave the manager the weapons that he took from the female. Authorities said they found McGuirl on her bike in the 500 block of Northwest 6th Street. The deputy wrote that he had encountered McGuirl and the victim from an incident earlier in the morning. The report states she was not at the tent and had no idea what was happening and urinated on herself yet again in the back of the squad. She urinated on herself again in the back of the squad car. As of Thursday afternoon, she remained in the sheriff's office, North Broward Bureau Jail, on charges of armed robbery and aggravated battery causing bodily harm. So, folks, if you're ever approached in Florida and you're about to be robbed, it may be worth it to ask if it's going to be number 1 or number 2. That's going to do it. Remember, folks, don't wait until you have an emergency to prepare. If you wait, it may be too late. If you don't make it out alive, you don't make it out at all. Stay safe out there, folks.